So let's begin working with Alteryx. And for our first example, in order to discuss some basic topics about Alteryx, we'll look at basic data movement. Bring data into your workflow, creating a stream, and moving the data out of your workflow into a new source. Typically, your data comes from a spreadsheet or a flat file. If you're lucky, it comes from a database, which actually makes your life a bit easier. So if we bring data in, we utilize our blank workflow canvas, and inside of our favorites category is input data. This is where the workflow starts. Need to point out that within user settings, there is an option down at the bottom that says use classic mode for your input and output tools. I have that checked. This simplifies the selection of your data sources. I recommend setting this once you've worked your way through a couple of workflows. And in my examples, I will always be having this turned on. So I drag my input widget onto my canvas. I need to configure it. From my drop-down list, I can choose File. I've also been working with these two data sets, and so they show up in my frequent list, but we'll go through it the long way. So I choose File. It brings me up the standard Windows dialog box. It has all data files chosen down here. This is a list of all the data file types that are natively recognized by Alteryx. In this case, we'll be looking for a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. We'll be working with our puppy table data. Once I've opened up the file, or Alteryx has opened up the file, it will ask me to select which sheet I want to use. In this case, I'm just going to choose the default data. So that's the only one in here. It gives me a preview of the data. Whenever I bring data in, I always drop a select widget onto the end of it. So lets me see the data types that are out there. And you can see that the data types that are here for the fields are limited when coming in from an Excel spreadsheet. Our numeric fields are doubles. Our text fields are v-strings of 255. And our birth date is a date type. It's good to understand what the different field types are available to you within Alteryx. To do that, I put together a couple of pages. All data types are broken into three categories. You have numeric, character, and date time. Alteryx has a number of different formats that you can choose for your numeric data. Boolean, which is a single digit, which is either a 1 or a 0, representing true or false. An integer has 4 different types of 4 different sizes. A byte is an integer from 0 to 255. Integer 16 is larger and allows you to have an integer starting at negative 32,000 going up to positive 32,000. I typically choose integer 32 unless I have a specific need, and it goes much larger. And in case integer 32 is not big enough, you can go to integer 64, which is upwards to 9 quintillion. Real numbers, or numbers with decimal places, can be identified as fixed decimal. This is where you have a specific number of decimal places and a specific size of the number that you can store that you get to choose. For example, if I was choosing currency, I typically do it 8.2 or 10.2. 8.2 says that there are 2 digits after the decimal place, the cents. 1 space taken up by the decimal point itself, which leaves us with 5 digits before the decimal place, which is up to 99,999. I can make this number bigger or smaller depending upon the size of the data, and add or decrease the decimal places depending upon my need. If you don't want to get that exact of your data store, you have a float field type, which gives you scientific notation with an unlimited number of decimal places, with numbers that are between minus 10 to the 38th and 10 to the 38th. And just in case those numbers aren't big enough, you can have a double field type, which is scientific, with a 1 with 308 zeros after it. Character fields are broken into 2 different types. One is fixed length, and this is best for short fields that are 10 or less characters. Once you define the field size, if the string that you're placing into that field is not as big as the field definition, such as if I just put 8 characters into a 10-character field, it will be blank padded to the right to fill out the field. There are 2 different field types inside of Alteryx for fixed length data. You have string, which is the Latin character set, your typical alphabet and numbers and special characters. You also have W string, which is your Unicode character set, which includes additional characters such as foreign language specific characters. For fields that are larger than 10 characters, the recommendation is that you use a variable length field. What this does is actually stores the exact number of characters for that field and puts what's called a cutting character at the end to denote where that field ends. This reduces the amount of memory that you are using, but keep in mind that Alteryx has to prepare for the maximum size of this anytime it's processing your data stream. Overall, this saves storage for large character strings. There are 2 field types, v_string, which is the Latin character set, and v_w string, which is the Unicode character set. And finally, we have date and time fields. Alteryx gives you the 3 basic types that you need. Date, which is just the calendar date. Time, which is just the clock time. And date time, which is a combination of the calendar date and the clock time. It's good to note what the standard format of input is for each of these fields. The standard format of the date is a 4-digit year, dash 2-digit month, dash 2-digit day. These fields must be that long. So for January, you need to include the leading 0. So January would be 01, and the 8th day of the month would be 08. Time is a 2-digit 24-hour time, a colon, 2-digit minutes, a colon, and 2-digit seconds. And keep in mind that these also must be leaded with a 0. So for example, 1 o'clock would be 01. And date time is again the combination, so it's basically the same 2 formats with a space between them. I'm always asked the question, why do you need to worry about defining your field types? Well, one reason is that to do certain operations, you have to have the right type of field. For example, if you want to add 1 plus 1 and get 2, those 2 fields and the resultant field must be numeric. And the other reason to make sure that you're choosing good field types is to limit the size of your data stream. So if you envision your data stream as rows of data flowing down in a stream, it is as wide as the overall length of each of the fields. So the recommendation is to improve performance and to minimize the amount of memory necessary to process your data flow. You should right size the fields that are in your stream. choosing just the right definition will minimize the width and maximize your performance. So for our example here, we can see that these are not very good data types definitions, and we could change those here in this select. So for example, puppy ID is definitely not scientific notation. It is just a numeric integer. I would choose integer 13 in order to right size it. And so I would continue along here, right sizing each of my fields. Alteryx is smart enough to work with the data source to figure out what the definition of each of your fields is. Excel interface is limited within its types of data that is defined and shared through metadata to Alteryx. If you're going to be using the same set of data for multiple workflows and you do not have a database to store them in, I recommend that you save your data as a YXDB file. This is an internal formatted database table that Alteryx maintains good metadata with. I have saved this puppy data with the proper data types. As you can see here in my recent list, there is a YXDB file. This is an Alteryx database file. When I click on that file, you'll see that the data comes in the same as it did with the spreadsheet. But the difference is obvious when we drop a select onto there. You can see that each of the data types has a predefined and more accurate definition to minimize my stream. This is the actual data that needs to be defined and moved up to a database. So when I get ready to move this puppy data into my database, I want to make sure all the field types are correct. And I've already done so and saved that as my YXDB file, where it's not saved as an XLS file. So now that I have my data, we'll want to save this into my database. Always like to run this workflow at this point in time, just so I can make sure that the data is processed through cleanly. So to store this data into my database, I must have an output widget. So my data is going to flow in, be retyped and renamed if necessary in my select widget, and then flow into my output widget. So I must configure the connection to the database. I'll do so in this drop-down box. It's one of the connections that I have saved in favorites, which is the subject of another lesson. I've defined a favorite connection to my RDS MySQL database. I will click on that. I now must tell Alteryx what the name of the table is. It must be fully qualified for MySQL. And I know that the schema name is Daisy Hill, and the table name is going to be Puppy Table. This information is not validated until the connection is made and the table is trying to be created. So be very careful with your naming. I have options to tell how to deal with this table. In this case, I will choose the basic one of create new table, but there are other options available. I always like to make sure that in the field name SQL style I say none, so that naming conventions default to the standard of the database and will not cause me problems in the future. Having done this, I am now ready to execute it. Once the workflow has been completed, you can look at the log. If you do not see the log, it's because you have connected or highlighted one of the widgets. Simply click on the white space in your workflow, and you'll see that it went ahead and wrote 2,000 records to this MySQL table, puppy table. I can verify the completion of this by bringing in my MySQL workbench, refresh my schema, We see the puppy table is here. I can select star from puppy table, and I can see the output of 2,000 records that I expected. To see the table definition, I can right-click on puppy table, and I can send to the SQL editor a create statement, and it'll show you the create statement that would be necessary to repeat the creation of this table. And as you can see, Alteryx has done a good job of translating from the field types in the workflow into column types within MySQL. So now this data is available for me to use from the MySQL database, as well as anybody else that needs to use it as well will have a convenient place to use it that has good table definitions. So now we have our data moved. I'll be spending some more time this week moving the rest of my tables up into the database so we can begin to build more sophisticated workflows. To see those additional workflows as I post them, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. If there's anything that you need me to explain further in another tutorial, or some additional information you might need in regards to Alteryx overall, please add a comment down below, and I'll reply back by creating another tutorial that answers your query. Have a great day.